Welcome in HQ Spotlight. Amanda Guerra, Tommy Tran with you. It is Tuesday. We were discussing the day. Still feel a little off,
Those midweek holidays made it really tough to figure out when the weekend was.
Tidbit confusing. However, it is Tuesday. It's a big Tuesday for the Titans, who did nab the #1 overall pick in this year's draft, already letting go of their GM, Tommy.
Yeah, ran Carthon 2 seasons there, had 2 head coaches during his tenure, and now the Nashville club is looking for a new front office executive. He's getting the boot after a 9-25 record the past couple of seasons. He replaced John Robinson, fired Mike Vrabel, and then hired Brian Callahan last offseason. Callahan stays on as head coach, and the new GM will have the task of making the most of the top overall pick in this year's draft. If they stay at #1, it'll be the 3rd time in franchise history the Oilers/Titans will have made the first pick. All right, let's bring in our lead NFL insider, Jonathan Jones here. JJ, what more can you tell us about what's happening with the Titans at the moment?
Yeah, I think whoever is going to be the general manager next to the Titans would like to know what's happening with the Titans. Where is there going to be consistency from the top down? This is yet another move by controlling owner Amy Adams Strunk. You go back 25 months ago, the Titans are 7-5, and she fires general manager John Robinson, who had never had a losing record. She then brings in Ran Carthon, pairs him with Mike Vrabel, then fires Mike Vrabel, keeps Ran Carthon, who is then allowed to hire Brian Callahan. Now Ran Carthon is fired, and they're looking now for a general manager who, according to President of Football Operations Chad Brinker, is someone who's going to eat, sleep, breathe football, someone who is going to be able to scout, to draft, and develop these players, because we know whether it was this regime and the misses that they had in free agency, when you consider L'Jarius Sneed and perhaps Calvin Ridley and Lloyd Cushenberry. If you go back to previous regimes and all the misses they had in the 1st and 2nd round, they need to draft, acquire talent, and develop that talent over time, something that has not been done in Nashville in some time. So that's where they're going to be looking. A couple of names that I would say, because Chad Brinker comes from the Green Bay system, look for guys with Packer ties. I'm not saying that it absolutely will be, but a name that has come up a couple of times, John Eric Sullivan, a long-time Packers executive there in Green Bay. I think he is someone who has been on a number of teams' general managers list and could certainly get an interview in Nashville.
Okay, that is something to look out for. You know, JJ, we had a graphic there of worst records in the NFL over the past 2 seasons. The Titans were on there. The Patriots were on there. They're looking for a new head coach. How would you describe their process that they're currently undergoing?
Very quick, Tommy, extremely quick. I mean, look, they played on Sunday afternoon. About an hour after the game, they had quite a lengthy statement from Robert Kraft already prepared. Maybe he writes quickly, or maybe that was already prepared before the game. Obviously, Robert Kraft knowing which direction he was going to go in spite of the victory there for the New England Patriots. They have already interviewed Pep Hamilton, longtime offensive coordinator, both in the college and professional level, most recently with the Houston Texans. They may still currently be interviewing Byron Leftwich. We remember him, of course, from his playing days, but also as a Super Bowl winning offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Those are 2 in-person interviews that the New England Patriots, by the end of today, will have completed. Interestingly enough, Tommy, because these 2 men are men of color, this now would satisfy the Rooney Rule, which would allow the New England Patriots to, at any point, hire a head coach, whether it is one of these 2 men or another head coach candidate that they plan to interview. I have confirmed a couple of times now, Ben Johnson does intend to interview with the New England Patriots, still waiting on a time and date for that. Mike Vrabel, of course, is going to be the top name that you have heard, that you will hear, who may very well be the next head coach of the Patriots. If it is indeed Mike Vrabel, I would anticipate a potential reunion in New England. Josh McDaniels, the former offensive coordinator with the New England Patriots, he could certainly be Vrabel's OC coming back to New England, and those 2 working together in the future of the Patriots, with Drake May, of course, at quarterback.
You bring up Mike Vrabel here. I'm curious to kind of get what you're hearing in terms of why teams would want him during this cycle here as opposed to some of the other candidates that are out there, JJ.
Well, it's interesting. Well, why didn't they want him last cycle, right? He was available, and they liked his tenure in Tennessee, but for whatever reason or reasons, teams ultimately passed on Mike Vrabel last year. And with the benefit of time, Tommy, I suppose that his record, his tenure in Tennessee looks even better, even though he was Coach of the Year, even though he's a guy who manages the clock in situations perhaps better than any other coach out there in the NFL. I would tell you this, there is this idea of leader of men, of culture builder that maybe wasn't as prominent 365 days ago, but certainly is today with the success of a Dan Campbell. When you see it, what Dan Quinn has been able to do with the Washington Commanders for the past 2 decades with Mike Tomlin. The list can kind of go on with these leader of men, CEO, culture building type head coaches. And so everybody wants one of those guys, and it could be Mike Vrabel. He will have no shortage of interest. He already has interviewed with the Jets. Again, I anticipate he will interview with the New England Patriots this week. The Saints are going to be interested. The Bears certainly are interested. The Jaguars could put in for him. The list could continue. If you have an opening, if you were considering an opening, you're considering Mike Vrabel.
Let's get to the Jets. What's the latest there in terms of their head coach and GM combo?
So this is the one job that has both open. And so in some ways it is attractive. In other ways, because they are the Jets and everything that comes along with it, it is unattractive. But Rex Ryan, the former Jets head coach, just completed his interview for head coach of the Jets. I know it's still crazy to think about and say, yet true. Rex Ryan down in Florida earlier today, meeting with Woody Johnson and Christopher Johnson, with the president of the Jets, with Mike Tannenbaum and Rick Spielman there. All of those folks participating in that interview. We know that the Jets have already had a couple other interviews. Ron Rivera, Mike Vrabel, as previously mentioned over the weekend. They're going to have Matt Nagy virtually in an interview tomorrow, and then a list of other candidates like Joe Brady, Arthur Smith, Vance Joseph, Aaron Glenn, Brian Flores, Josh McCown, Darren Rizzi. The list continues, and then you move over to the general manager position where Mike Borgonzi, the assistant GM of the Kansas City Chiefs, will be interviewing there in person in Florida tomorrow, and that sort of continues those GM interviews that they had already begun a few weeks ago. I think ultimately what we wind up seeing is the Jets hire a general manager, and then that GM comes into the process late when they have narrowed down the pool with head coaches and they offer their input. But ultimately, the owner there, Woody Johnson, will be having the final say and determination on who leads his team, the Jets, and hopefully, of course, breaking that very long playoff drought.
I just can't wait for this first domino to fall. And then last but not least, let's talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars looking for a new head coach.
Yeah, so the Jaguars deciding not to move on from general manager Trent Baalke. We will see who ultimately winds up interviewing there. These are requests, Tommy. Let's be clear. Every year, teams are going to put in requests. Just because you put in a request doesn't mean that someone's going to interview. But we see the list right there. Ben Johnson there at the top of the list, quote unquote, if you will. Aaron Glenn is another name you should be hearing plenty about at a number of different spots. Certainly going to be a front runner there for the New Orleans Saints and the New York Jets. An interesting name, Robert Saleh, the former Jets head coach. He was a finalist there in Jacksonville before they ultimately decided to go in a different direction. So they're going to get another crack at him. I know there's a lot of thought about Trevor Lawrence, what you want out of him, bring the most out of him, of course. And so you want to say offensive coordinator, offensive-minded head coach. A lot of people have made the connection with Ben Johnson or even Joe Brady, the Bills' offensive coordinator. I would lean that way. I would lean offense, but Shad Khan may not necessarily go that way. We will see who ultimately winds up taking these interviews, and perhaps more interestingly, Tommy, who winds up turning them down.
Yeah, with that, though, let me just follow, because Trent Baalke is there. How does that potentially complicate things with that talent and candidate pool?
Well, look, he has a reputation around the league, right? And folks who have worked with him think one way or think the other. And I know that folks who have not worked with him certainly do not probably think too highly of him because of the word around the league of what it's like working with him. They're going to have to go through that process themselves and figure that out. And Shad Khan is going to have to get that feedback from these guys and see if he can get one of those top candidates or not. So that's why I say it's going to be interesting to see. Just because you request someone doesn't mean they take the interview. Just because you think the interview went well doesn't mean they did. Just because you offer someone a job doesn't mean they accept it. And so we still have a couple more weeks left to see just how this all shakes out with Jacksonville.
All right, that's our Jonathan Jones with the very latest. JJ, certainly appreciate the information and insight as always. We do have our broadcast teams announced for Wild Card Weekend on Saturday. Ian Eagle, Charles Davis, Evan Washburn calling Chargers Texans on Saturday. Then Jim Nantz, Tony Romo, Tracy Wolfson, and Jay Feely on for Broncos Bills Sunday. And there's also a Nickelodeon broadcast for that Saturday Wild Card game.
Slime.
Yeah.